We all uphold the principle of maintaining faith and attending Mass, but how many truly understand what Jesus really wants from his children? The man in this letter is no different. He was a Catholic, but it was only at his last breath that he truly understood what Jesus desired from him. It's not just about faith, but a profound truth, a truth that millions of believers have forgotten. If you are Catholic or have grown up in the church, this story is for you. Before we begin, comment with your first name and the city you're from. We want to pray for you personally and ask God to remember your name in His divine plan. And if this message speaks to your soul, please consider supporting this mission by clicking the Super Thanks button below. Whatever you give, God will return to you in ways far greater than you can imagine. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can build a community of 20,000 hearts full of faith. Hearts that will carry God's light into a dark and desperate world. Now, let's listen to his testimony. My name is Paulo Sharma. I'm 63 years old, living with my wife in a quiet suburb, one of those places where everything moves like the hands of a clock, not too fast, not too slow. My wife and I have been together for nearly 4 decades. We're not exactly cold to each other, but we're no longer warm either. It feels more like 2 familiar roommates sharing a roof, a routine, but no longer sharing themselves. I used to call it stability. That word sounded positive, even admirable. But the older I got, the more I realized what we call stability is sometimes just well-organized drifting. It makes you fade, little by little, without making a sound. Our 2 children are grown now, living an entire state away. A call every few weeks is proof enough they haven't forgotten us, but the conversations revolve around health and work. They end just as quickly as they start. I know they're busy, but deep down I feel a truth that's hard to swallow. The distance between us isn't just geographical. It's a silent void where love has been quietly replaced by duty. Lately I've been waking up in the middle of the night, not because of noise, but because of a restlessness I can't explain. Worries about money, aging, the fragility of a body slowly breaking down. I used to be an engineer, had a stable job, a home, insurance. People would look at me and say, he has everything. But I knew, inside, there was a vast emptiness I couldn't name. Not painful, just lingering, like the steady drip of water in an abandoned house, keeping me from resting. I started to notice the signals my body was sending. My heart raced after just a few steps upstairs. My vision blurred when I drove at night. Then I went to the doctor. He smiled, said the usual, just age, try exercising more, eating better, and stress less. But how could I worry less when I didn't even know exactly what I was worried about? I was raised Catholic, baptized as a child. I used to sing in the church choir. My grandmother taught me to pray before bed. But over time, that faith faded, not into disbelief, but into habit. I still believed in a higher power, but it was a distant belief, like believing the sun exists while living your whole life in the shade. I heard about heaven, angels, resurrection, but they felt more like beautiful fairy tales people tell themselves to ease the fear of dying. I never really believed they were meant for me. Until that day. The day everything stopped, not metaphorically, but literally. And only then did I begin to understand that what I had been losing, quietly, for my entire life, was my soul. That morning felt no different than any other. My wife and I were driving into town to pick up a few things for dinner. The sky was clear, the country road quiet, and in the steady rhythm of a 40-year marriage. There was nothing to suggest that my life was about to take a turn from which there would be no return. She sat beside me, scrolling through her phone to check the shopping list. We exchanged a few words about the stew she was planning to make, about the weather. those familiar lines of a life built on routine. But just as I was about to smile and respond, something strange hit me. It was as if an invisible hand reached into my chest and began to squeeze from within. I gasped. A cold sweat broke across the back of my neck. Everything around me started to blur. I tried to speak, but no sound came. My hands slipped from the wheel. The car veered off. The last thing I saw was a flash of light, then darkness. The next time I opened my eyes, I was standing across the road. I had no memory of leaving the car. I had no body, no breath. Yet I was fully aware that I still existed, clear-minded, invisible, weightless. Our car had crashed into a mound of hay off the roadside. Smoke rose from the hood like a final exhale, and there I was, still in the driver's seat, motionless, eyes half open, vacant, a hollow shell. My wife stumbled out of the car in panic. She screamed my name, banged on the window, tried to open the door. It was jammed. Her hands trembled as she dialed for help, and I stood there, helpless, watching. My soul ached, not for myself, but for the woman who had walked beside me through life, now breaking down before my eyes, while I could no longer reach her. And yet I wasn't afraid. I wasn't in pain. A strange stillness surrounded me, like I had just stepped out of chaos and was now standing on the edge of the world, where all sound was muffled and movement slowed. Everything blurred like a heavy dream. And then I felt it. A pull. Gentle but irresistible. Something was drawing me away. I tried to look back. My wife was still kneeling by the car, tears streaming down her face. But me, my body, was no longer mine. I knew I was leaving this reality. I drifted as if passing through a thin veil between two worlds. Darkness enveloped me, but it was not the darkness of death or fear. It was soft, cradling, like an embrace. No gravity, no time, only silence, pure and complete. And then I saw the light. At first it was just a pinprick, like a lone star against the night sky. But it grew, brighter, warmer, as if it was reaching out, waiting for me. There were no words, but I felt it clearly. Come. I didn't know where I was going, but in that moment, for the first time in many, many years, I felt no anxiety, no doubt. I only knew one thing. I wanted to keep going. I don't know the exact moment I stepped out of the darkness. All I know is that suddenly I was in the light. But this wasn't light as we know it. It didn't dazzle or make me squint. It didn't shine from the outside in, but seemed to radiate from within me, seeping into every corner of my soul, into every fear, every hidden hollow I'd tried to bury. I felt it not as a glow, but as a presence, vast, holy, and yet impossibly close. And then, without a single word spoken, I knew. I knew I was standing before the very being who had created me. Not some elderly figure on a cloud, not a vague idea from scripture, but a living source of light, overflowing with love, understanding, and truth. I couldn't make out a clear face, but I felt the gaze. A gaze that needed no words, no questions. A gaze that touched the core of me and undid me completely. My soul broke down like a lost child reunited with its mother, because in that very moment I knew I had been found. I realized I'd longed for this love my entire life without even knowing it. Not approval, not praise, but love. Complete, absolute, unconditional. Love that didn't demand I prove myself worthy. I couldn't speak, but everything inside me whispered the same question. Why am I here? And the answer didn't come in words, but as a wave of deep peace that poured through me. Gentle, clear, a truth that had never needed proving. You have always been loved. And then that light, so full of knowing, turned me gently, and I was led into the next part of the journey, something no one had ever warned me about: a life review. It wasn't a montage. It wasn't a blur of images flying by like old memories. Every moment of my life played out again, vividly, down to the smallest detail, but not just through my eyes. I relived everything I had done, thought, and said. And, most astonishing of all, I felt what others had felt in those moments. Every person I had ever touched, through kindness or neglect. I saw myself as a 6-year-old boy breaking a glass cup in the kitchen. I remembered the fear of being scolded, the shame of my clumsiness. But this time, I also felt my mother's exhaustion after a long day, and the tender love in her heart as she knelt down and said, "It's just a cup, sweetheart." A small moment, but under this light it shone like a golden thread stitched into the fabric of my soul. I was then guided through the years of growing up, but not just to revisit them, to understand them. I saw the sad look in my wife's eyes on the night I chose silence over sharing. I had told myself I was just tired, but now I felt the loneliness she carried that evening. A quiet ache stretching out like an empty room no one returned to. I had thought of myself as a good man, kind, decent, but under the light of truth and love there was nowhere to hide. Every excuse, every rationalization fell away like husks. I wasn't condemned, I wasn't accused, but I saw so clearly the choices I had made, the chances to love that I had passed by, because I was tired, afraid, or too busy chasing things that now meant nothing at all. I understood then this was a lesson, not one you could learn from books, not one that could be preached from a pulpit. It was a lesson of impact, that every choice I made, no matter how small, left an imprint on someone else's soul, and that every action made out of love, no matter how quiet, was never, ever lost. The life review continued, but this time it no longer revolved around grand events or glaring mistakes. It took me deeper, into a realm where the smallest things I once considered insignificant began to shine with radiant light. I saw clearly: a warm nod, a reassuring hand on the shoulder, a hug without any reason. All of them left behind faint trails of light, radiating from one soul to another, and then multiplying outward. Like tiny stones dropped into a still lake, they created silent ripples I had never noticed before. At the same time, the moments I had let pass, quiet yet sharp as blades, appeared before me. I saw myself walking past a homeless man curled up by a street pole, his eyes searching for contact that no one returned. I saw my co-worker, the one I had brushed off, swallowing back tears as they stood alone in the break room, simply because no one had bothered to ask, "Are you okay?" The vacant stares, the impatient frowns, the half-spoken sentences I cut off because I was staring at my phone, all of it left imprints, not on the physical world, but deep in the hearts of others. I had once thought that kindness had to be big, but here I realize true kindness asks for no condition, no audience. It simply asks that you show up. And then they appeared, my parents and my grandmother, whom I only remembered through faded black and white photographs, and a friend from high school, long gone in a tragic accident when we were still young. They didn't walk toward me, they appeared, as if summoned by some sacred heartbeat, by a current of energy that didn't belong to this world. I collapsed within my soul, not out of fear but because of how achingly familiar they felt. I cried like a child because in that moment I knew they had never truly left me. They were radiant in a way I can't describe. No wrinkles, no pain, no heaviness of age. They spoke no words, but every glance, every smile, every embrace told 100 stories I'd never had the chance to share. I felt forgiveness, not spoken, but known. Forgiveness for the birthdays I forgot, the phone calls I never made, the words of love I never said aloud. And I understood, real love doesn't require a physical presence. It transcends time, defies distance, and flows through every quiet choice we make. And it was in that very moment, for the first time in my life, I understood life isn't about achieving something. It's about becoming the very love we were created from. I once believed my journey had ended in the light, a place overflowing with love, where I reunited with my loved ones, where I learned profound truths about kindness and connection. I thought that was the destination, but it turned out to be only a part of the greater picture my soul needed to see. There was another part, deeper, darker, that awaited me beyond the brilliance of the light. I don't know how I moved there, but I could feel it clearly. A subtle yet irresistible energy was pulling me somewhere else. The gentle warmth that had once embraced my soul faded away. I passed into a different space, not by walking, but by sliding through layers of awareness, through a dense and silent depth. Where I arrived was a dimension unlike anything I had known. No color, no melody, no sense of being loved. Only a thick, dim mist that clung to everything like cold stone. I looked around and realized I wasn't alone. Scattered in the darkness were other souls, but none of them spoke. None looked at each other. No one offered comfort. Each seemed trapped in a private world, an invisible cage made of emotions that could not be released: regret, anger, lust, fear, and an unbearable loneliness. There were no chains, and yet they could not move. No prison bars, yet they could not escape. I could feel the endless hunger of a soul who had lived for wealth. I felt the searing rage of another, burning from the inside out like an eternal fire. I sensed the numb paralysis of someone who had clung to resentment their entire life, now left with only a looping echo of their own torment. And the most terrifying thing wasn't the emotions themselves. It was the complete and total absence of love. There were no flames like the hellfire we hear about in sermons, no punishment from outside forces. Instead, it was the absence of love that had become the heaviest punishment of all. No light, no connection, no presence of God, just a space where every idea of hope had slowly eroded away. I began to understand that no one was brought here by judgment or divine wrath. They had arrived through thousands of small decisions made during their lives, moments when they refused to love, refused to forgive, chose to harbor anger instead of letting go, chose to shut their hearts instead of opening them. It wasn't a single decision, it was a slow, quiet drift, one that pulled them bit by bit away from the light, away from love, away from everything that once tethered their soul to life. There was sorrow in that place, deep, silent and heavy, not bitter, not loud, just sorrowful, like an unfinished symphony left forgotten. The souls there did not scream, they did not writhe in pain, they simply endured themselves. And I realized the most haunting truth. This wasn't a place they were imprisoned in, it was a place they had chosen, without even knowing it. I stood there like a guest allowed to witness, not to judge, not to intervene, but I knew without a doubt that I was meant to remember what I saw, to carry it back, to warn. Darkness, I understood, holds no real power. It does not need to attack. All it needs is for love to be withdrawn, and when that happens, everything else begins to unravel on its own. When I whispered the wish to leave that bleak place, a gentle light began to emerge. It wasn't blinding like before, just a faint shimmer, enough to let me know my journey wasn't over. The light didn't pull or urge me, yet I could feel a tender will lifting me up, gently but with purpose. It felt as though I was being led, not by my own will, but by a power far beyond understanding, something I could only call love. I was no longer in that darkness. The space around me expanded, not in a physical way, but in the way my consciousness unfolded. It was as if I had stepped into a deeper layer of awareness, where knowledge wasn't taught but remembered, from a place both distant and familiar. I didn't see a teacher, there was no chalkboard, no voice lecturing. The only thing surrounding me was light. And from that light came waves of knowing that didn't pass through my thoughts, but through empathy and union. The first lesson I received was about connection. Threads of light intertwined before me, forming a vast, living web that covered all of existence. Every soul was a point of light, and every action, every word, even every thought, created ripples that traveled through the web. Nothing was isolated. No one truly stood outside. A single act of kindness could ripple across layers of reality, touching people I might never meet. A frown of anger could spread too, wounding spirits already fragile. I saw a man snapping in frustration on the street, and the impact of that anger spread into his home, into his family, to strangers he brushed past. I also saw a child smile at an elderly woman sitting silently on a bench. That smile carried light, softened a day of loneliness, and continued on through those the woman met afterward. Every small act left an imprint, either of light or of shadow, and I understood. I could not live without affecting the world around me. The question wasn't if I left a mark, but what kind of mark I was leaving. The second lesson was about life's true purpose. I used to think life was about achieving something, success, wealth, recognition, something big enough that others would say I had lived a meaningful life. But in that space, those things dissolved completely, like dust under the tide. I was shown my life again, but this time not from my own perspective. I was placed inside the hearts of those I had touched. I saw the quiet disappointment in my wife's eyes during the times I chose silence over sharing. I felt the hurt of an old friend I had ignored when he needed me most. There was no blame, no judgment, just the raw, simple emotions of those I had overlooked or unknowingly wounded. But among those moments were also radiant images. Times I forgave, times I listened now gleaming like stars. I realized that the true purpose of life wasn't to accumulate, but to return to our essence, a soul born to love. Not romantic love, not dramatic sacrifice, but quiet, genuine love, for myself, for others, and for the one who made me. Love is not a fleeting emotion. It is a conscious act, a sacred presence in every breath of life. The third lesson was about time. Here there was no past, no future. Everything existed all at once. I saw my childhood, my youth, my aging years as pieces orbiting the same center. I wasn't recalling them, I was in them. I relived those moments as if they were happening now. I felt every choice I had made, every possibility I didn't choose. And I saw clearly how each path would have opened a different current, a different chain of consequences. Time, as I once knew it, was simply a tool for the soul to learn, one moment at a time. But the soul itself is not bound by time. It exists in a timeless now, where everything is present, waiting to be seen, understood, and chosen again. What I thought were permanent mistakes were really unfinished lessons, and the miracle was this: it is never too late to learn again. As each lesson settled into me, I felt the light inside me growing, not because I had become better, but because I was remembering who I truly was. I was no longer Paulo Sharma, a 63-year-old man living in the suburbs. I was part of that light, a soul born of love, carrying awareness, and gifted a life as a sacred school. And I was not alone. No one is alone. Every soul, whether struggling, hurting, or lost, is still connected to that same current of light. I understood finally that all of us, regardless of faith, background, or condition, are on the same journey home. No one is forgotten, and the light, no matter how faint, is always patiently waiting. Still within the quiet space of that spiritual classroom, after I had grasped the sacred interconnectedness of all living beings, a distinct light began to radiate around me. It wasn't like before. This time the light reached deep into the core of my soul, touching the very beliefs I had lived by my entire life. And what was revealed next nearly took my breath away. The truth about money. I had always taken pride in being a responsible person. I worked hard, saved diligently, invested cautiously, and always had a plan for tomorrow. I never worshipped money, but I treated it as a safety net, something that gave me control, provided security for my family, and brought a sense of comfort to my life. I believed that if I had a solid house, a respectable savings account, and a bit of professional recognition, then I had lived well, and after death, I would at least have something to leave behind. But in the absolute light of that realm, everything I once believed suddenly became strangely fragile. I was shown my life in reverse, like a slow-mashing film playing backwards, and I was stunned to see that all the scenes tied to material things, the times I signed contracts, the important meetings, the certificates, the new car, began to fade, becoming so translucent they were almost invisible. They left behind no echo, carried no energy, emitted not even a flicker of light. They were completely silent, colorless and meaningless in the context of the soul. I felt as though I had invested my entire life in a currency that held no value in the world beyond. That emptiness didn't come from anyone else, it came from within me, a hollowness of spirit that had never truly been filled with anything of real meaning. Just as I began to feel paralyzed by regret, the light gently shifted, leading me down a different stream of memories. Lighter, softer, but more powerful than any shock before. I saw myself quietly holding my wife on a stormy evening as she cried without saying a word. I saw myself holding my newborn grandchild for the first time, whispering prayers I had never dared to believe I had the right to speak. I saw myself stop the car in a cold rain to help an elderly woman cross the street. Not because someone was watching, but simply because it felt like the right thing to do. I saw myself forgiving an old friend who had betrayed me. Not because they deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry that bitterness any longer. All those moments, seemingly too small to remember, now burst forth in brilliant light. They were vivid, real, and filled with a warmth so tender it made my soul ache. They weren't just actions. They were the soul's declaration that it was still alive, still loving, still connected. Then, in sharp contrast, I saw everything I had missed. I saw myself decline a chance to play with my son because I had a meeting. I saw myself ignore my mother's phone call, thinking, I'll call her later. I saw myself promising my wife we'd talk when I had time, and that time never came. The missed moments didn't scream accusations at me. They just appeared, silent, hollow, like doors once opened, now closed forever. I had thought I was wise for knowing how to save, to plan ahead, to keep the future secure. But in that light I suddenly understood that I had traded gold for sand, just because the sand was already at my feet and shimmered brighter under the temporary sun of this world. And the gold, the true gold of the soul, was love, presence, a gaze, an embrace, a forgiveness given without condition, a kindness offered without being seen. No one taught me that, no mantra was chanted, but in that moment the truth was etched into my heart with a light both gentle and resolute. The true currency of the soul is love. I understood that the greatest poverty is not found in a bank account, but in a heart that has become isolated. We don't fail because we lack opportunity or possessions. We fail because we didn't love, didn't give, didn't live truthfully. I realized you can hold the entire world in your hands, but if you don't know how to offer a genuine hug, if you lack the courage to forgive, the humility to say you're sorry, or the strength to live honestly before God and yourself, then you will cross into the next world with your hands completely empty. As I began to understand more, the surrounding light slowly dimmed. A gentle yet unwavering force started pulling me back. I knew I was leaving that sacred realm, not cast out, but sent, not to continue life as before, but to return with a mission, to become a light in a world that is hungrier for it than ever before. In that final moment I felt a whisper, not through sound, but through the very presence of the light. You will forget many things, but love you will not. Then I fell. No pain, no panic, only sorrow. I fell away from the divine, back into the once motionless body, returning to what we call life, a life I now understood as the battlefield of the soul. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't tell what was a dream and what was real, but the light within me remained, and I knew I had returned, carrying the mission of a soul that had once touched eternal love. Perhaps within Catholicism there lies a terrifying truth, a reality so horrifying that we are not meant to know it, forcing God himself to intervene. He is not just warning the faithful, he is coming for the priests as well, and this fate befell Father James Callahan, who dedicated his entire life to serving him. Father James Callahan believed he understood what awaited after death. A lifetime of devotion to the Catholic Church had convinced him that, when his final moment came, his soul would be welcomed into the presence of God. But when he died, everything he believed in shattered. Father James was pulled into a terrifying reality, where Jesus appeared and revealed a shocking truth about the very Catholic Church he had served with all his heart. But what exactly was that truth? Stay until the end, because it will leave you utterly shaken. And you are watching Eternal Bible Stories, where true near-death experiences are shared to awaken faith and illuminate the soul. Before we begin, let me know which city you are watching from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, take this moment to click subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss any message that God may want to speak to you through the stories we share. And now, this is the letter from him. My name is James Callahan. I was born and raised in a small town in Georgia, where the Catholic faith shaped every part of my upbringing. From an early age, I felt a deep connection to God, as if my life carried a greater purpose I couldn't yet name. At 18, I entered the seminary without hesitation. It felt like the natural next step. I spent years studying, praying, and preparing to serve both God and others. At 25, I was ordained a priest. One of the happiest days of my life. I felt complete, as though I had truly found where I belonged. I was assigned to a parish in Savannah, a city filled with history and quiet mystery. I loved walking its cobblestone streets, imagining the stories whispered by those old moss-covered trees and colonial homes. My days were full: morning mass, visiting the sick, hearing confessions, preparing sermons. At night I'd study scripture or plan church activities. I loved the rhythm of it all. It made me feel useful, like I was making a real difference in people's lives. Sometimes parishioners would thank me for a sermon that moved them, or advice that brought peace. In those moments, I felt I was fulfilling the mission God had given me. Of course, there were difficult days, times of doubt when I wondered if I was truly helping people draw closer to God, but overall, I was content. I believed I understood faith, life, and even death. I thought I knew what waited beyond this life. After all, I'd preached about it for years. But I was wrong, so deeply wrong. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon, the kind of weather that makes you feel a little pensive, reflective. I had just finished celebrating midday mass and was on my way to visit a few patients at the hospital. As I drove, my mind was preoccupied with the upcoming Sunday sermon, debating which passage from Scripture would best speak to the hearts of my congregation. Never in my wildest thoughts did I imagine that this ordinary drive would mark the turning point of my life. That in just a few minutes, everything I thought I knew about life, death, and faith would be shaken to its core. But that's how life is, isn't it? We never really know what's waiting for us around the next bend in the road. I was driving down Savannah's main avenue, a street lined with towering oak trees, their branches dripping in Spanish moss, as a light but steady rain blurred the windshield. I glanced at the clock, 1:47 p.m. It's strange how those small details get imprinted into our minds during moments that change everything. I wasn't speeding, I've always been a careful driver, but as I rounded a gentle curve, a car suddenly appeared in my lane, heading straight toward me. What happened next was chaos. One moment I was calm, lost in sermon prep. The next I was caught in a violent collision. The screeching of metal, the shattering of glass, my body thrown forward, then violently pulled back by the airbag. All of it crashed into my senses at once. Everything turned white. And then came the pain. Searing, unbearable, radiating from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I couldn't move. I tried to cry out, but no sound came. The air was thick with the stench of gasoline and burning rubber, making me nauseous. Bit by bit, my vision began to return, and I realized I was trapped inside a mangled heap of metal, the car no longer recognizable. I could see the cracked windshield in front of me, rainwater sliding down like slow-moving tears. The steering wheel was crushing my chest, each breath harder than the last. I tried again to move, to call for help, but my body refused to respond. Panic set in. Dear God, I thought, is this how it ends for me? The irony wasn't lost on me. I, the priest who had spoken about death so many times, was now staring it in the face. I heard the distant wail of sirens. Someone must have called for help. I tried to stay conscious, but the pain was overwhelming. My eyelids grew heavy, my strength fading, and then something strange happened. The pain didn't vanish, but it began to feel distant, as if it no longer belonged to me. And that's when the most astonishing and terrifying moment of my life began. I found myself leaving my body. Yes, I know how that sounds, but it happened. I was floating above the wreckage, looking down at my own lifeless body. It was a feeling beyond description. I no longer had weight, nor did I feel any pain. It was as if I had become pure consciousness. I could see everything around me with astonishing clarity. Cars stopping, people rushing over to help, raindrops falling from the sky. Everything seemed more vivid, more real, in a way I had never experienced before. I tried to scream, to get someone's attention, but no one could hear me. No one could see me. I was there, and yet somehow not there. It was in that very moment that I realized I was dying, or perhaps I was already dead. And the most terrifying part was that I had no idea what was going to happen next. As I floated there, watching the accident scene below, I began to feel something, like a force pulling me. It was as if something or someone was calling me. At first it was only a faint sensation, but it grew stronger and stronger. Suddenly I was being pulled away from the crash site. Everything around me began to blur, as if I were moving at incredible speed. The colors swirled and blended together, forming a tunnel of light. You know those stories we hear about near-death experiences? I always thought they were exaggerations or figments of the imagination. But now I was living exactly that. The tunnel seemed endless. I couldn't tell if I had been inside it for a few seconds or several hours. Time no longer made any sense. As I was carried through the tunnel, I began to hear voices. At first they were whispers, then they grew clearer. I recognized some of them, my parents, childhood friends, people who had already passed on. It was as if my entire life wasn't flashing before my eyes, but echoing through my ears, and amid that surreal journey, my thoughts turned to my faith. As a priest, I had spent years preaching about the afterlife, about heaven and hell, but nothing I had studied or taught had prepared me for what I was now experiencing. It was all so different, so real, and yet so far beyond my understanding. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, I began to feel an overwhelming peace. All the fear and confusion I had felt at first slowly gave way to a sense of welcome, as though I were returning home after a long journey. I thought to myself, this is it. I'm going to heaven. I'm finally going to meet God face to face. But then, something changed. The light at the end of the tunnel, the one I had expected to be bright and warm, began to dim. It grew weaker, clouded. The peace inside me slowly turned into a growing unease. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Suddenly, the tunnel of light vanished, and I found myself plunged into the darkest darkness I had ever known. It wasn't just dark, it was alive. It pressed in on me, suffocating, overwhelming. Fear returned with crushing intensity, but this was a different fear. It was no longer the fear of death, but the fear of the unknown. I tried to scream, but had no voice. I tried to move, but had no body. It was as if I had become nothing more than a thought floating in the void. And that's when I knew. This wasn't heaven, not even close. What I was about to experience was something I had never truly understood in all my years as a priest. Bit by bit, my eyes, or whatever I had in that state, began to adjust to the darkness. And what I saw was worse than anything I could have ever imagined. I was about to uncover a reality that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the afterlife. The darkness slowly gave way to a scene I truly wish I had never seen. It wasn't the hell of medieval paintings, with red demons and souls boiling in cauldrons. It was something different, and in some ways, something far worse. The colors there were strange. I don't quite know how to explain it. It was as if everything was faded, yet at the same time overwhelmingly vivid. Imagine mixing all the colors of the rainbow, then pouring a bucket of gray paint over them. That's the closest way I can describe it. And these colors seemed to move, to flow, as if they were alive. The ground, if I can even call it ground, seemed to pulse. It wasn't solid like we know it. It felt as though it was made of emotion, anger, fear, despair. You could feel it radiating up from the floor. Every step, or whatever it was I was doing, since I no longer had a physical body, felt like walking across painful memories. And the heat, dear God, the heat. It wasn't the heat of fire, you know. It was a heat that came from within, like every cell, if I still had cells, was boiling from the inside out. It was the heat of shame, of regret, of guilt, a heat that scorched the soul. The air, if it could be called air, was thick and suffocating. Every breath was an effort. It was as if the very atmosphere wanted to consume you, to pull you in and devour you. And the smell, it wasn't sulfur or anything like that. It was the stench of terrible memories, missed chances, and words left unsaid. But the worst part, the absolute worst, was the sound. Yes, there were screams, many of them, but they weren't just screams of physical agony. They were the wailing of souls tortured by their own mistakes, whispers of deep regret, echoes of promises broken, and most terrifying of all, sometimes I heard laughter. But not joyful laughter, empty, hollow, lifeless, the sound of madness itself. As I floated there, I began to see people, or rather souls. Some wandered aimlessly like the living dead, others knelt sobbing, and some screamed into the void, begging for forgiveness or a second chance. And then came the most harrowing moment. I began recognizing faces, people I had known in life, people I had once considered paragons of virtue. What were they doing here? That's when I saw a familiar figure in the middle of that chaos. I recognized him immediately. Monsignor Whitmore, my mentor, the man I had admired most during seminary. He had been a model of devotion and holiness. Seeing him in this horrifying place was more shocking than the car accident itself. Monsignor Whitmore saw me. His eyes, once full of wisdom and compassion, were now empty. He turned toward me and shouted, "James, it's not too late for you. You can still change." I was confused. Change what? What did I do wrong? He continued, his voice full of pain and deep regret. The devotion I showed was only a mask. My heart was full of pride, greed, and hypocrisy. I never truly sought God. It was all just for appearances. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I had admired most, the one I saw as a living example of faith, was telling me it had all been a lie. I didn't want to believe it. It couldn't be true. But as I looked around at all the suffering souls, something inside me began to understand. This place, this hell, was not a punishment God had imposed. It was the result of our own choices. As I struggled to process everything I was seeing and hearing, something miraculous happened. A radiant light began to shine, cutting sharply through the suffocating darkness that surrounded me. It was unlike any light I had ever seen before. It didn't hurt my eyes, but it was so bright it felt as though it pierced straight through my soul. From that light, a figure began to emerge. I didn't quite know how to describe it. It looked as if it was made of pure energy. It vaguely resembled a human form, but at the same time it was more, much more. Something deep inside told me that I was in the presence of an angel. The angel's face, if it could be called a face, was calm, serene. But the eyes, oh God, the eyes. It felt like I was staring into the entire universe. There was a wisdom in them that both overwhelmed and drew me in. Then the angel spoke. The voice was like soft thunder, if that makes any sense, not only echoing around me, but resonating within me. "James," the angel said, "hell is not what you think it is." I was confused. "What do you mean, not what I think?" I looked around again. The suffering, the despair, it was all so real. "But all this pain," I began. The angel gently interrupted. "This place is not merely one of physical torment, James. It reflects the true soul of those who dwell here." As the angel spoke, it was as if I could see beyond the surface of the tormented souls around us. I began to understand that their true suffering came from within. Many who call themselves believers, who wear the garments of faith, have never truly sought the love of God, the angel continued. Their souls are trapped here because they strayed from the truth. Those words struck me like lightning. How many times had I clung to appearances rather than the essence of faith? How many times had I judged others by their outward devotion without knowing their hearts? The angel must have sensed my pain because the voice softened. "Your journey here has a purpose, James. You must understand that the true path of faith is not found in empty rituals or rigid obedience to religious rules, but in a heart that is pure and sincere." I felt so small, so humbled in the face of that truth. A lifetime of priesthood, all the sermons I had preached, had I ever truly grasped the essence of faith? The angel looked at me, then extended his hand. A radiant light enveloped me, gentle yet full of power. Everything around me began to fade away. The cries, the heavy breathing, and the gloomy atmosphere of the place I had just been were swept away like a dissolving dream. I felt a movement, as if my soul was gliding through invisible layers of space. Then the light appeared, not a blinding, overpowering light, but a gentle beam, so tender it made my heart want to weep. Before me stretched a vast meadow, reaching to the far horizon. The pale blue sky cast a soft shadow over the rolling hills. Young grass swayed in the breeze, and from afar I heard the sound of a murmuring stream like heavenly music. The faint scent of wildflowers lingered in the air, and the space was filled with life. Not the kind of life we know on earth. It was deeper, more real, closer to what I had once called eternal life. Is this heaven? I turned to ask the angel, but when my eyes met that face, I was stunned. There was no angel anymore. It was Jesus. His presence still radiant like the morning sun, but not blinding. His eyes held perfect understanding, as if every part of my past, my fears, my mistakes, and my hopes were all being seen and yet still loved. I didn't feel judged. I felt completely understood, like a lost child who had finally been found. Jesus spoke first. This is a place for chosen souls, those whose time to leave the earth has not yet come. I have chosen you, James. You have witnessed where lost souls wander, and now it's time for you to learn how to live truly in faith. A breeze gently passed through the grass, carrying with it a sweetness so pure it made my chest tighten. We walked slowly across the meadow, leaving no footprints, yet every step seemed to carve deeper lessons into my soul. It was just him and me and the truth. The very thing I had spent my whole life preaching about, but now realized I had never fully understood. I thought the Lord would begin with gentleness, but no. He began with truth, and that truth was a sword. James, the Lord said, his voice not loud but echoing to the depths of my soul. There are things you need to see, because if not, your faith will remain only a robe, not a fire. He raised his hand, and the meadow opened like a curtain. Before my eyes appeared images, not illusions, but sacred realities hidden from sight. I saw a priest in vestments, holding the Holy Eucharist high, but his heart boiled with pride. I saw an elderly monk teaching humility while hoarding wealth and threatening younger monks. I saw confessions being secretly recorded, prayers distorted to serve human power, and the most painful, I saw children, innocent and trusting, harmed by the very ones called Father. Those who wear my robe, Jesus said, have learned to use my name to hide from me. Every word he spoke was like a blade slicing through illusions I had held. He didn't speak in anger, but with the sorrow of a creator watching his beloved child fall from within. I wanted to speak up, to defend, to say it was only a part, that the church still had many holy people, but he looked at me in silence. And in that silence, I saw parishioners leaving church with hollow eyes. They did not hate God, they simply no longer believed in how we represented him. I saw people rejected for being different, for being too wounded, for daring to ask questions. I saw young priests filled with ideals, only to be crushed by a system that valued form over truth. You have preached about me, Jesus said, but have you lived in me? I had no answer. My whole life as a priest, I preached about faith, but now I realized I had never let faith shine into the darkest corners of my own heart. He continued, "Hell is not a place I throw anyone into. It is the place souls build for themselves when they live too long in deception. Every time you choose a facade over truth, another brick of hell is laid." Then he showed me Monsignor Whitmore, the man I had revered, whose sermons I once copied line by line. Now he was imprisoned in darkness. He preached about eternal life, Jesus said, but lived for fleeting applause. He spoke in my name, but never sought me. I wept, not only for him, but because I saw myself in him. All the years I had been busy with structure, with schedules, with image, and had forgotten true love. Jesus let me sit beside a crystal-clear stream. When I looked into the water, I didn't see my face. I saw my soul. Unconfessed sins, sermons not lived out, the eyes I had turned away from when someone needed to be embraced. I was about to apologize, but Jesus gently shook his head. You were forgiven before you even knew you needed to be. I couldn't hold myself together anymore. I just wept, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming sense of being loved unconditionally. And then he taught me through a light no book could ever record. He taught that love is not an emotion, but a repeated choice, even when no one sees. He said every soul has a purpose, not needing to be a saint, just live truthfully, love sincerely, and dare to forgive. He pointed to the sky and said, "James, you don't need to protect my name. My name needs no defense, but my love is being forgotten. Return, not to preach more, but to live differently." In that stream's reflection, I saw clearly every moment I had failed. When I chose to preserve my image rather than stoop down with the weak, when I taught about mercy while silently judging. I turned again to apologize, but Jesus shook his head. "You were forgiven before you even knew you needed to be." That sentence made me burst into tears, not from guilt, but from an indescribable lightness, to be loved without having to earn it. Jesus said that death is not the enemy, it's a doorway. But he also warned me, knowing death is a door does not mean you can take life lightly. He taught me that every day I breathe is an invitation to join his work of love. No grand acts were needed. Sometimes simply listening, simply being patient with someone in pain, is a miracle. I asked him about the thing I had always wrestled with in my heart. "Lord, what is the purpose of life?" I had imagined the answer would be something grand, a great mission, a life full of achievement, but he simply smiled. Every soul bears a unique role. No one is meaningless. Some change the world through sermons, others change a life with a timely hug. He looked at me as if asking, "You've preached about the saints, but have you ever helped someone see the holiness in their own life?" We sat silently, and he gave me the final sermon of that day. Not about God in churches, but about a Creator who is not bound by form. You may find me in empty sanctuaries, but also in the wind between trees, in the dew on leaves, in the solitude of the seeker. He wanted me to return, not to defend his name, but to reignite true love among those weary of rules, judgment, and lifeless religion. And then he spoke of something that left me speechless: forgiveness. What crushes the human soul the most, he said, is not hunger, not sickness, not death, but the feeling of being unforgiven or being unable to forgive oneself. I understood. I had offered forgiveness in the confessional, but I had never forgiven myself. And when he said, "Forgiveness is letting go of the burden you mistook for your destiny," it felt as if the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. Before the light began to recede, Jesus took me to a higher place, where souls soared like unnamed stars. He looked at me like a friend about to say goodbye. "James, remember," he said, "everyone you meet carries part of my message. Listen to them, as if you are listening to me." I wept. I was no longer a priest, no longer a preacher. I was just a soul learning to love for the very first time. And before I was pulled back into my body, he spoke the final words I will never forget. "You don't need to be the sun, just be a light. I will do the rest." I don't remember exactly when the light faded. I only remember that I felt myself falling. Not falling like tumbling into an abyss, but being pulled back into an old world, one full of noise, limits, and heaviness. I heard the beeping of machines, hurried footsteps, and someone calling my name. "Father James, can you hear me?" A woman's voice, laced with panting breaths and frantic heartbeats. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like stone, and my body no longer felt like mine. Something inside me resisted, did not want to leave that meadow, where I had just been taught about love and truth by Jesus himself. The first feeling I had upon waking wasn't gratitude, it was overwhelm. Everything was too bright, too loud, too material. The pale glare of fluorescent lights above made me wince. The sharp scent of antiseptics rushed up my nose and triggered nausea, and the wires and tubes surrounding my body reminded me how broken this flesh had once been. I overheard the doctor telling someone I had been in a coma for 2 weeks and that they hadn't expected me to survive. But to me, that time felt like a lifetime. Not a lifetime of the body, but of the soul. Nurses rejoiced. Family members visited one by one, all calling me a miracle. But they didn't understand. The miracle wasn't that I had woken up. It was that the man who had awakened was no longer the same man who had crossed into death. The first time I returned to the church, my heart pounded like it had on the day I gave my very first homily at age 25. But this time was different. I no longer carried the confidence of a well-trained priest, but the trembling of a soul that had just been rescued. I looked down at the familiar congregation, faces that had heard my sermons hundreds of times. But today, I knew I had to speak differently. I didn't tell them about a dream. I didn't call it a miracle. I simply said that I had seen something Scripture speaks of but few have truly experienced, the unconditional love of God, the truth of the soul, and that the path to the light is not found in rituals, but in a heart that is humble and sincere. Some wept, some questioned, but deep down I could feel that they knew I had truly met the Lord. And from that moment on, I was no longer preaching. I was sharing an encounter. The letter from Father James Callahan not only leaves us with much to reflect on, but also opens a door into a deeper understanding of faith and the human soul. Perhaps what he experienced is a gentle reminder for each of us to live every moment fully, to love with all our hearts, to forgive without hesitation, and to be kind, not only to others but also to ourselves. Seek the truth, but do not fear the mysteries that remain, and above all, let love, unconditional love, beyond logic, be the light that guides every step of your journey. Because, as Father James said, that is the meaning of life, of death, and of eternity. Pure, simple, and infinite love. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, subscribe to Eternal Bible Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback is how we continue to spread light, truth, and hope to the millions of souls still waiting to be awakened.